Okay, so between the last video and this one, we've now just wrapped the thread around. You'll remember we tied a knot and doubled the thread back on itself, and all we've done is just revolved around the loom as many times as it takes. Now, this project is going to be 31 beads wide, which means I need to have at least 32 strings to keep my beads inside here. In a sense, I'll have 31 gaps, 32 strings. Okay? So you need to make sure you have that thought out before you do this. Some people will also, depending on the project, add an extra thread on the two outside edges for reinforcement. So if you're going to do that, make sure you plan accordingly so you have enough threads tied on to start with. Keep in mind, the most important piece at this stage isn't so much that you don't cross these. You're going to have one continuous loop anyways. You can sort that out if it comes down to it. So don't be too concerned about keeping everything separated. The main thing to keep in mind is where your knots are. I started here, and I'm going to want to end relatively in the same spot on the same side. That way, when I get all this pulled up, the numbers will stay the same on each side. If I don't, I may have 29 here and 30 on the other edge if I'm not careful. So just pay attention to that, because when you double back on something like this, you have room for one bead here where you didn't here. So just keep that in mind when you do your work. Again, we're not going to tie anything to the loom itself, because that way this whole thing can move when we're doing our work. At this point I've done 30, so I'm going to finish this piece up. Some people will put their ball of yarn or their thread cone or whatever they have here into a plastic bowl and put a plastic lid over the top of it. Put a hole in it, and then that way you can just move it around, and this will just unravel inside, and you don't have to keep track of it. That may be easy for some, not for others. It just depends on personal preference, but you just want to keep that in mind. As I go along, I'm going to keep things kind of moving down so that they're cinched up. And again, I'm not pulling too tight, I'm trying to keep things snug. Now, I get finished, I'm going to want to cut my thread off the ball here. And the next piece is again going to be tying this off. So where my other knot is, I'm going to be working to try to get there. It's really not going to be a very difficult piece. I'm just going to make a couple half hitches on itself like that, so that way I can kind of tie this in, and I'm going to want to make sure that I'm keeping it somewhat tight. Now, you don't want to tie your knots so that it can slide on itself. If you're not careful, you can get it so that this can loosen up. So what I tend to do is make a slip knot like that so that I can tighten it first, and then once it's tightened, I'm going to put a couple more bites on it so that it's not going to end up sliding on me from here on out. So again, tight enough to lock in, and loose enough that you can slide it to start with. After that, you just want it to stick. So that's really all it's going to take. If you really feel like you need to, put a couple more on the other side of the knot here, and you should be good to go. Having an extra tail like this isn't a problem. Again, the important piece is that these two knots are about the same place. Now, when I go back through, I'll make sure that my spaces are nice and even. I can kind of measure them with my finger themselves, just like that. And now I'm ready to start thinking about laying the beads in there. I can do it over here on this end too. This isn't so as important. You'll find some looms have springs or combs or something that are going to space this out for you. Once you get your first row of beads in there, the beads will do that for you, so you don't have to worry about that from that point on. And we'll do that in the next video, getting started and so on, and we'll go from there. But that's pretty much how you string this loom. It's a really simple process. So